Today we're going to talk about adding backdrops or the background images to your SketchUp models. So here, a huge part of what makes this scene exciting and interesting to the client is what you could see once we removed all this wall. This is just a wall with a couple windows in it here. So it was really important to make sure that we got the background in and made it look right once this image was rendered in Podium. So what I'm going to talk about is true whether you're rendering your image or whether you're just looking at it in Photoshop. Just in your SketchUp model if you're not rendering. What I want to talk about is how some tips and tricks about the best way to make your background images look right and look like in the correct position and not look like they're just a photo pasted on somewhere that doesn't quite look right. So here's the SketchUp model before I rendered it. If I back up, you can see, back up like this. This is what we've talked about many times, that I've actually removed this back wall to let more light into the rendering. And you can see as I zoom around how this model is set up. So there is just a face that I've made back here that has a background image pasted on it. And there's a midground, which is always really important for making the outside and the inside kind of come together. Again, let me go back to Photoshop to show you that. If you just have an empty wall and suddenly a picture outside, then you don't get this sense of believability because it suddenly just kind of drops off and there's an image. So having this kind of midground that has the same lighting on it as the interior is always going to help break up the two. And also just having, some kind of edge where one clearly stops and the other starts can be really helpful also. It's hard to have like some grass in SketchUp kind of flow into the grass in the photo behind it. It's also really helpful to have the light in your backdrop image match the light that is coming inside. So here, this is a very sunny, light drenched setting. There's lots of light coming in through all these windows. And if I look at my backdrop image, if I look at my backdrop image here, you can see it's also a very, very sunny day. If you are just working on a make-believe project, when you're looking for images on Google Images or in Podium, again, you want to look for light that matches the light that you have going on inside your model. The other thing that's critical to make your background look right is to make sure that your horizon lines line up. So here I can see the horizon line is a line that's going usually horizontal in your image. So here it's a little hard to see because I've got a river and I've got some trees, but you can see that the horizon line, and here's in my model, and here's a good strong one here. I'm just looking at the line of this banister matches the horizontal line of the horizon line of this image. So if this was taken at a different angle, so that my banister was running like this, I'd want to also adjust my background image to have the same horizon line. You can adjust or skew the background image by using our texture position tools in a slightly different way than we have before. I'm going to double click on this, right click, and go to texture position. But this time I am actually going to right click again and uncheck fixed pins. That will make all these pins kind of act independently and free floating. And if I look at like my horizon line here, I could take and kind of skew this image a little bit to change the perceived horizon line in my image. And if it gets all wackadoodle, you can always just right click and say reset and let it start over again. Also, if you're on site and you're taking this image, I'm just going to go to my backdrop image. This is actually putting some photos together with something called photo merge in Photoshop. But most cameras in your phones now have a panoramic option where you can take a nice panoramic shot just using your camera, your phone camera. You do want to make sure you get enough sky overhead. It's a lot of times I've like taken a photo and it's like, darn it, I don't have quite enough sky because you're at ground level looking out. So just if you're on site, make sure that you do that. And that can be a problem with images that you find in Google Images, is just making sure that they're big enough to cover the whole area that you need. All right, here you're going, what has she done? But this is actually where I often start with my backdrop images. Particularly here because I had one image here, but I also needed to see views out these windows. So again, if I scroll around, you can see that I actually have one backdrop here and then another looking out those upper windows. And sometimes if you have multiple windows and you only have one image, you need to do that and kind of change the positioning of where the picture, the photo lies on each particular backdrop frame itself. And then to get it in the right place can also kind of be a trick. So what I often do is just make a big red backdrop, and I start by looking in X-ray mode. And then say, for example, here that this one was positioned like this initially. Let's make it go this direction. So I can easily see it's like, because it's bright red, it's easy to see, and because I can see the openings behind it, that way I can move it over and get it placed where I need it to be. And then when I know that, I can go back and replace the red images with the backdrop images that I have. There is another source for backdrop images actually in the Podium browser, which we haven't really looked at yet. So if you go to the Podium browser and you look under the Environment tab, you're going to see Backgrounds 360, Backgrounds 180, and Backgrounds. So Backgrounds is just a flat image, just kind of like our photos that we have looked at. And you could put yourself in a lovely Greek island if you choose. These Backgrounds 180 can work really well. And what they are, I'll just download one, is actually a kind of a curved, you scroll out here. So it's like this curled 180-degree image, and I'll rotate it. Degrees. So you can see whichever direction you're looking, the image is going to be in the right place. And it's also very conveniently, they actually have the horizon line labeled here. So if I go inside my model, and I'm just going to hide this red one, you can say, here's the horizon line, so I could match it up. I can move it so that it matches our horizon line. So here you can see this one doesn't look great because actually I guess this image does go up higher. It just doesn't have much of a sky. And this is kind of an unusual photo because there's windows way up here, whereas usually there's just going to be windows here. You could also move this back. Let's moving it up. If it seems like it's too big or too little, you can move it forward or back in space also. So this isn't a very particularly attractive one that I've chosen, but there's lots more that you may want to take a look at here. Let me just go back here again. And again, this is in the Podium browser. So if you're just using SketchUp, you're not going to find this. This is an add-on to the rendering program Podium. There's also 360-degree backgrounds, and if you download this, what it actually is a huge, let me get rid of this, total 360-degree view around your model. So you might use this if you're creating an animation, a walkthrough, and everywhere you look out a window you need to be able to see something. but they're just much larger models and kind of cumbersome to work with. So when we're just rendering one scene, I wouldn't recommend using these 360-degree backgrounds. And one last trick I sometimes do. So here the background is certainly lovely. I really want to see it. And again, here's the original backdrop image. But sometimes what you see outside the windows might not be so attractive, like that car lot we just saw might be an example. So using Photoshop, and unfortunately you can't do this just in SketchUp with Podium, you need Photoshop to do it. Sometimes I'm going to deliberately blur the background, and it's almost like depth of field in your camera lens. So I'm going to go to View, I'm going to go to Filter, Blur. A quick easy one to just use is a Gaussian blur. And you can see as you slide this that your backdrop becomes fuzzier and fuzzier. So that's a good way to kind of keep the believability of what's out there, but to lessen the impact of a less than attractive background. Some people also might argue that if you took this image normally with just your regular camera, you know, if you expose for the inside, what's outside is often going to be super overexposed. So you could do the same thing and just go to Image Adjustments and make this a lot brighter. It's almost like it was blown out with the camera. You know, one problem that I find with that now is that with current you know, architectural photography and HDR photography and Photoshop, is that very few images are actually going to be, or architectural images aren't really going to look like they are straight out of most of our cameras. They're going to be photoshopped and have brightness and contrast and curves and levels added so that the backdrop and the interior both have exposures that we can read with our eye. But again, if you have a very unattractive background, making it lighter so to kind of replicate the effects of what a camera might do might be another great way to blur it out. And one last trick I sometimes do. So here the background is certainly lovely. I really want to see it. And again, here's the original backdrop image. But sometimes what you see outside the windows might not be so attractive, like that car lot we just saw might be an example. So using Photoshop, and unfortunately you can't do this just in SketchUp with Podium, you need Photoshop to do it. Sometimes I'm going to deliberately blur the background, and it's almost like depth of field in your camera lens. So I'm going to go to View, I'm going to go to Filter, Blur. A quick easy one to just use is a Gaussian blur. And you can see as you slide this that your backdrop becomes fuzzier and fuzzier. So that's a good way to kind of keep the believability of what's out there, but to lessen the impact of a less than attractive background. Some people also might argue that if you took this image normally with just your regular camera, you know, if you expose for the inside, what's outside is often going to be super overexposed. So you could do the same thing and just go to Image Adjustments and make this a lot brighter. It's almost like it was blown out with the camera. You know, one problem that I find with that now is that with current you know, architectural photography and HDR photography and Photoshop, is that very few images are actually going to be, or architectural images aren't really going to look like they are straight out of most of our cameras. They're going to be photoshopped and have brightness and contrast and curves and levels added so that the backdrop and the interior both have exposures that we can read with our eye. But again, if you have a very unattractive background, making it lighter so to kind of replicate the effects of what a camera might do might be another great way to blur it out. Thanks for taking a few minutes to look at this quick tip. If you're interested in learning more, check out my other instruction videos on YouTube, search for Diane Dieterich, or go to my website to look for more information about classes and online trading. Thanks.